already. The idea is that when you're applying for a program, you go through the websites, you see all the requirements, and then you go through this application process. Now, I'm part of these people who sees your applications, and I want to give you a little bit of a sneak preview what we actually looking for, and also how I think that you should approach applying for a master program. Okay. So the first thing is, before you apply, you probably want to look at several programs so you get an idea of the universe out there. We do have a program here at NU, Master Finance program, but there are other programs out there. So you want to find a program that matches your needs. It might be programs abroad, or it might be here in Kazakhstan. And one tip that I give for students is that when they look at programs, to select programs according to what we call likely, target, and reach. So because you want to get into a program that's a good match for you. And then if you put these in 3 categories, then you can kind of like the likely category is going to be the programs that you're pretty sure you're going to be admitted to, given your credentials. Target is what you actually want. And then you can also select some programs which you call reach. And reach is actually something that you think you won't be able to enter, but you're applying to it anyway, just to kind of test yourself. And that kind of gives you a good idea then what kind of programs are out there. So that's my tip 1. Then tip 2 is don't exaggerate with the number of programs that you're applying to. So don't apply for 100 programs, but focus on the select numbers of programs that you are really interested in. Because the application process for programs can be heavy and it takes quite some time. And if you have too much divided attention, then often you cannot put your heart in the application. So just select a couple of programs that you say, okay, this is really a match for me, and then fill in the applications for them. Then tip number 3 is find out if there are early admissions for some programs. Early admissions basically means there's an admissions round before the main round. These early admissions, many schools are having selected number of places for early admissions because you want to fill in the numbers for the program. So sometimes the early admissions is an easier way to get into a program. Why is that? Because this is like you select one program that has early admissions, and then you kind of commit to that program, even if you don't know the results from the others, then the school is happy that you're matching with them. It basically proves an indication that you are really putting that program as number 1. So the school is happy with that, and then often they will be it will be a little bit easier to be admitted to such a program. Then before applying, this application can be a lot of work. Make sure that it's complete. Often the applications go through the administration, and that is somebody who is not exactly reading your application, but is making sure that all the forms are there, that all the boxes are ticked. And you want to make sure that all these boxes indeed are there. I know of applicants in other schools that had their application rejected just because they did not include a particular part. So if there is something that not works, if you are having problem with uploading documents, then there is always a telephone number or an email address from the admissions office. Contact them. Don't feel shy about that. That also puts you already in touch with the program in a sense. And that can you can also ask questions about whether this is a good match or not, just before you're applying. Then if you look at the application components, we put them here in 6 categories. One is academics. The academics are basically your GPA. It also includes your test scores if you have to do a test. The admissions office is going to also look at the ranking of your school, what school you're coming from, because GPAs are kind of school specific, and also to the study programs that you have been following prior to applying. So make sure that if you have any strengths there, like for instance, your GPA is really high, that you include that in your application. and then also mention the best points in kind of the cover letter. We're going to come back to the test scores in a little bit. Test scores are often required. Sometimes they're optional. It depends a little bit on what study program you have been following or what your current GPA is, or what school you're coming from. But so some might be compulsory. For some, the test scores are an option. But we'll talk a little bit about that later. It might be that the program is asking for work experience. This is often difficult for students entering a Master of Finance program because most of our applicants actually don't have work experience. But if that's part of the application, then you can mention also your internships or some part-time jobs that you have been taking during your studies. Then there's a category involvement. Why is it there? It is because if you are entering a program, then you're going to have to work as a team. You're also actually have to be an asset to the program. So what admissions wants to see is that you have some leadership skills, or you have been working with teams, or you have been doing particular services, have some extracurricular activities. It's not very important what it is, but it kind of shows that you are a team player. And that's important just for the program and also for later when you are looking for a job. So there is often some question involved around involvement. Often that you can also write about this in essays. Some programs ask for a motivational essay and sometimes also an essay that describes your aspirations after the program. So take these things seriously. Before there's you see that later on there's going to be an interview. Before there's an interview, there's going to be what we call a reader, and that reader is going to go through these essays and score them. So that becomes part of your general score. Be kind of original with these essays. The weight for these essays is not very high, but you do want to indicate that you can write and that you can structure some arguments about your motivation or about your later prospects. Then typically we also ask for recommendation letters. Often this is somebody you've been working with, as that to somebody's class you've been taking a very good grade. Also, when you have recommendation letters, you can actually recycle this typically among the different programs you're applying to make it a little bit easier for these people who write the recommendation letters. So when you fill out the application, my tip number 6 here is, this is not the time to be modest. Okay? Show your best side. Make sure that the admissions office and the admissions panel sees what you're best at. Okay? Maybe use some color, or if you're uploading documents, so that you get attracted to these points. And then tip number 7 follows a little bit on tip number 6, that is that, yes, it's not time to be modest, but you should also not exaggerate. You have to be honest somehow in what you're filling in. And why is this? Well, this for a couple of reasons. One is that you do not want to get admitted to a program if you do not match with the program. So if you pretend to be better than you are, then it might be that actually then you start struggling within the program. Admissions actually wants to make sure that there's a good match. And also there's typically an interview that follows the application. So in that interview, you have to perform as the way that you are showing yourself in the application. Okay. There's typically room for a cover letter, and that cover letter, you might spend some time on that and then address your strengths there. So see that as a kind of a summary of your application, where you are giving all the markers to where you are shining, where you are standing out. Okay. It might be that you also know that you have some weaknesses, and you can point that out and say, well, I have that weakness, but I have been working on that. For instance, it might be that you're coming from a particular program that is not strong in mathematics, and they want you to have the base in mathematics. You can say, well, I am actually now working on Coursera or on some online platform in catching up with these topics. Okay, so you can address these weaknesses as well in the cover letter. That might help. Then testing. So the program that we have here at NU gives you particular options, and there's also some exemptions. So the testing that we demand and that many programs ask are either GMAT GRE or a modified ALEX test, kind of not a personalized test, but a test that we modified so that it's kind of comparing a little bit with the more standardized test. And then there is also IELTS, or another test that you can take for showing that you have an English language proficiency. Now, it might be that you're exempted from these tests. It might be that you're having a high GPA and coming from a school that is on the exemption list. That means that you don't have to do this test. But if you are, even if you are qualifying for an exemption, consider taking a GMAT GRE test. And why is that? Because it makes it a lot easier for the admissions panel to rank you. These are standardized tests that are internationally also used. And so once you have that test grade, the admission, you make it actually the admissions panel easier to see that you are a good student or that you have the capacity to take part in this program. So, of course, for a GMAT GRE test, you need to kind of prepare a little bit for it. So if you haven't done this, we actually also offer another test, an ALEX test, which is a lot cheaper as well. So you can choose between these. But GMAT GRE, the nice thing is that it's standardized and that you can also use it for other schools, or actually then just put it on your CV later on. There are people who keep these GMAT GRE scores if they test well and put that on their CV even when they look for jobs. All right, so look at the testing and see whether, you know, where you are exempted, and then make a decision that kind of like fits with your profile. Then when you have done all this and written all these essays and uploaded all the documents and also the test results, that is quite some work. Then go through a checklist and make sure that you have addressed all the items that the admissions office is asking you to address. I mean, you should actually do that before. And for instance, if the admissions is asking for whether you have a background, that they prefer somebody with a background in a particular topic, and you have that, then you want to mention that somewhere. Yeah, what I would do is I would mention that in my cover letter. So the cover letter can basically be a checklist somehow that that makes sure that you have addressed all the possible demands that the admissions office has. That makes it, think of also of admissions when you're applying, make it easy for the admissions officer to assess your application. That is going to streamline their process, and they'll be more happy when they have to give you a score. Okay, so making a checklist is part of that. Okay, then now, what's happening behind the scenes? Well, at this point, when you hit that submit button, then what the admissions office is going to check first the applications for completeness, whether the applications are complete. If they're not complete, you're probably going to get a call or an email if the admissions office is nice. We have a nice office here, but for some admissions offices are not going to bother. They have plenty of applicants. And then when your application is complete, it passes to an admissions panel. And that admissions panel is ranking applicants based on a number of criteria. And the criteria that stand out are typically the ones, what school are you from? What is your GPA? What did you study? Is that a good match? Have you had any work experience? Where did you work? Work experience kind of impresses as well. Maybe something else is really outstanding. You've taken part in some competitions, or maybe you've taken part in case studies and you won one of these competitions, or you were a runner-up. This is all going to impress the admissions panel. And then they have a kind of a ranking. And from that, they will decide to send out invitations to some of the applicants for an interview. Okay, so the admissions panel makes a short list and then invites the applicants for an interview. So what is the admissions office, or what is the program looking for? What are the concerns that the program manager has, for instance? One is that we want to make sure that you can start the program without having too much hiatus, without having lack of knowledge or background. So the idea is that we're checking the applicant whether they have the knowledge and skill set to start the program. Okay, so keep that in mind when you are filling in your application, that's one of the things that we're looking for. That's why I'm saying best to write in your cover letter a good summary of what your strengths are. Then the admissions office or the program director is going to look for applicants who are going to be able to complete the program. That means that, for instance, if the program is full-time and you're working full-time, then the admissions officer is going to ask you or is going to contact you to see whether you are actually going to still planning on working full-time or not. Okay. Some programs are part-time programs. There, this would not be a change. But so the worry that program managers have is that will the applicant be able to complete the entire program? Then another factor is, will the applicant, and that goes a little bit higher, will the applicant contribute to the program? Is that applicant going to be an asset to other students? Okay. So if you have particular skills that would help other students to complete the program, for instance, it means somebody is proficient in programming, somebody has really good math skills, somebody is reading daily the financial news, then these applicants are going to contribute to the program, and that will be an asset. Therefore, the admissions office is going, or the admissions officers are going to be more inclined to give that a higher score. And then what another concern is that we also are a school with a program with a reputation. So we want graduates who have some vision, who know what they want to do after this program. They're not just following the program for the program. No, they have career plans. So we want to know whether a graduate will also shine after finishing the program, right? So that is what we are concerned about. If you match these criteria, then you probably get good news. That means that you're going to be invited for an interview. Now, the interview is very different. That's going to be either in person, or it might be a group interview. It might be that there's a panel of interviewers. In some places, there's also a panel of students who come at the same time, where you kind of compete against each other during the interview. Now, this is the moment for you to shine. This is not the moment where you want to be shy. You really want to show who you are. And don't be afraid of the interview. It is there to, again, find out whether you are a good match, whether you are going to complete the program. Okay, so again, be honest there with your questions, but also show your best side. Then tip 13 is, during the interview, avoid beating about the bush, which basically means avoid saying things that you don't know. So if somebody's asking you a question, then you want to take a pause, want to take a breath, and you want to answer that question directly, instead of, for instance, reverting to just some general talk. Okay, so maybe write down the questions when somebody's asking a question, have some pen and paper ready. Just ask what the question actually is so you can refer back to that. Or if you don't remember what the question is, or the question is not clear, then rephrase the question and ask it back to the interviewer. Is that what you're asking? So that also buys you some time to then formulate your answer. Allow a pause for the interviewer to interrupt you. It happens sometimes that applicants are so enthusiastic that they keep on talking and that the interviewer cannot stop them. So from time to time, see whether you have already answered the question. It might happen that you have everything already explained in 1 minute and then feel that you have to talk more because maybe 1 minute is not long enough. You can do that, but the best thing is not to extend it in such a way that you get into this domain where you actually don't really know what you're talking about anymore. So stay very concrete and to the point. Then interview questions, and this is based on experience I had in this school and other schools, is that there's typically some way that's going to be probed about some current affairs. Current affairs, depending on what program you would be applying for, but for finance, it would be, have you actually read the news about financial developments in the past week or two? So it could be that there is something about what happened in a particular part of the world. Maybe there has been a new company that's been listed. Maybe something happened to interest rates, something happened to exchange rates. Somebody might ask some local information. So if you go for the interview, take some time to read The Economist, maybe read a financial newspaper like the Wall Street Journal, or read like the New York Times, something that gives you a little bit of background of what's going on in finance. For other programs, you want to read some other information. So that's going, because sometimes it might be that one of the interview panel members will ask you, okay, yesterday this was in the news. What do you think about that? Then if you enter your application, you have the transcripts that you upload. Now that's a good source for the interview panel to connect with your past and to figure out how much you remember from these courses. So even if you have a high GPA or low GPA, they're going to actually look at what courses you've been taking, and they might take that as an opportunity to kind of start a conversation. Okay, so browse a little bit, remind yourself what you actually have done in the courses that are relevant for this Master of Finance program. So what we typically look at is for people to have a math background, maybe also some accounting background, and then maybe some statistics. And we will kind of probe towards that. So best is to go through the syllabi of your past courses, and that's going to refresh your memory on what you kind of can expect as a question. One component might be skill testing. And skill testing might be that somebody's going to ask a really, really technical question. For instance, how can you invert a matrix? Or how would you program this in a particular language? It doesn't happen all the time, but some interview members, panel members do have these kind of questions. So be prepared for that, that you might have a question like this. And then usually there is some time left at the interview, and there's an expectation that you also want to know something about the program, or that you have some questions. So the interviewers are going to say, hey, do you have anything you want to ask us? And it's important to kind of think about this beforehand, because you have just been answering all these questions that I've been asking, and then suddenly they turn the table and say, do you want to ask us something? So be prepared for that and ask a question that you do want to ask. It can be a question about course specific, or it could be something about the program or about scholarships. Think about that before you are, when you're preparing for the interview. Also, if possible, provide specific details when you're answering a question instead of general concepts. So if somebody's going to ask you, how would you program something? Then if you know specific details, you want to actually use that opportunity to show that you are an expert on that. And then you say, well, I would use this module, or I would write this code, instead of saying, well, there is something that I use some programming language. Or for instance, if there's a mathematics test, you can say, hey, this is the way I would approach it, rather than giving a general concept. Often the interviewer is going to probe to see how deep your knowledge is about that, but you can already anticipate this and providing specific details. So then that's more good news. Once you pass the interview, you might get a letter that you are admitted to the program. Then for a Master of Finance program, there's a couple of things you want to browse up on. You can do that, of course, before the interviews, but it's also worthwhile doing so that you're totally prepared when you're entering class. And there's three main parts that are essential, I think, when you're taking a Master of Finance program. Now, most of these are also going to be addressed during your classes, but if you get a head start, if you already work on this a little bit before, then that's going to benefit your development within the class, within the larger group. So on mathematics, I would suggest look up your matrix algebra. There's a lot of econometrics and a lot of asset pricing using matrices. Think about derivatives, integrals, and also Taylor series. So derivatives are often used to find minima, maxima. Integrals are used to find surfaces under curves. And then Taylor series are often used for approximations. If you haven't done Taylor series, that's fine. But just look up the concepts and remind yourself again what derivatives are, what integrals are in mathematics. And that's going to help you a lot when you then start off these classes. For software packages, these days, a lot of schools, and we use several packages, but there's some open source ones that are very popular, R and Python. And then there's also Visual Basic also that you can install in Excel. These are used in the class. Now, there's no assumption that you're all proficient, that you are proficient with these packages. But again, it really helps by playing around with these packages before you start the course. Then you will be one of the people in your class that already has some experience in this, and that really helps you to develop within the program. And then if you have had classes on statistics and regression analysis, this is something that's also in our programs, but that would be, again, giving you a head start if you browse up on these kind of concepts. Yeah, Kigali, that's it.
Thank you very much, Professor Tom. Actually, even me, I was very impressed. This presentation was very in detail, and I hope that this information will be useful for our prospective candidates. So, dear students, dear guests, I think if you have questions regarding admissions, regarding the program, maybe you have questions dedicated to the Professor Tom, as it's time to ask. Don't be shy, and please raise your hand or just write in the chat. So, Tom, if you don't mind, you can stop the share.